Perhaps it all started as a joke, a bit of black humour among staff in the hospital corridors.
She's always there, isn't she?
Who?
Letby.
In 2015 and 2016, the neonatal unit at the Countess of Chester Hospital experienced a spike in unexpected infant deaths. Between 2013 and 14 combined, 8 babies died. But in 2015 to 16, it was 17. And they all took place in a 13-month period, with one nurse always seemingly there. Although no coroner's reports had found anything suspicious, the doctors went to the management with their concerns. Lucy Letby was temporarily removed from the unit, but investigations found no evidence against her whatsoever. The doctors were made to publicly apologise. They did so and went to the police. In May 2017, a retired paediatrician from Carmarthen, Dowie Evans, heard that police were investigating and informally offered his services as an expert witness, telling them,
"This sounds like my kind of case."
He was shown the medical notes of one baby and concluded within 10 minutes that this was murder. Dowie Evans ultimately became the prosecution's chief expert witness, alleging 5 methods on the part of Letby to deliberately harm or kill babies: injecting air into the stomach, injecting air into the bloodstream, adding overdoses of insulin, inflicting trauma to the throat and liver, and force-feeding too much milk. Determining the likelihood of any of this depends on how you frame it, because there are 2 entirely different ways of looking at the case of Lucy Letby. The biggest problem for the prosecution: there was no smoking gun. One doctor, Ravi Jairam, said he saw Letby watch a baby's oxygen levels fall and she did nothing to intervene. But he had said nothing at the time, and that single vague testimony years later was the sole eyewitness account of anything untoward. There was an X-ray of a different baby that showed suspicious air pockets in the stomach, but it eventually emerged that Letby wasn't even on duty between this baby's birth and when the X-ray was taken. The strongest evidence against her were tests suggesting she had administered potentially lethal doses of insulin. However, those tests can be unreliable, especially in neonates, and more detailed tests are needed to confirm. No such tests were carried out. Then there was the staff rota spreadsheet. She was always there, just as the babies were always stable and faced sudden unexpected collapses. And there was her notebook, found in her house, full of seemingly deranged scribbles such as "I did this" and "hate." In court, her manner struck at least one reporter as odd.
We had months and months of her not saying anything, just sitting there while this case is swirling around her, and she was completely impassive. She barely moved, she showed very little emotion. That was so fascinating. When she went into that witness box, 14 days she was there. Over the course of a month, she tied herself in knots. She struggled when she was cross-examined. She agreed with things, then she disagreed with things she'd previously agreed. I found that was a central part of my assessment.
Letby had written what amounted to a confession. Could this, like every single other piece of damning evidence, really have an innocent explanation? What are the odds?
It's been argued that each one could be explained by other factors, but there's no getting away from the fact that bad things happened time after time when she was around.
The Countess of Chester Hospital's ageing neonatal unit had multiple problems. Sewage would back up into the sinks, and a killer bug was found in 2 of them. Sometimes the floor would flood. The unit was rated to take very premature babies, but it was understaffed and that staff were underqualified. One baby's traumatised father described a scene of absolute pandemonium, with doctors and nurses looking up what to do next on the internet.
I saw a nurse Googling a procedure. It looked like they were following a tutorial rather than they actually knew what they were doing.
Lucy Letby was one of the most qualified nurses. She was sometimes rung off duty for advice. Consultants' rounds on most regular wards are daily. Here, they were twice weekly. A highly critical external review at the time revealed these problems. It later emerged the hospital was rated 5th worst in the NHS for recognising and treating sepsis. Only 1 in 3 getting treatment fast enough. One senior paediatrician, Alison Timmis, had emailed the hospital's chief the previous year.
Things are stretched thinner and thinner and are at breaking point. When things snap, the casualties will either be children's lives or the mental and physical health of our staff.
For every excess death, there was indeed another explanation. As more documents came to light in 2024's Thirlwall inquiry, the picture of stable, healthy babies with sudden, unexpected collapses collapsed. The medical notes painted a very different picture. Sometimes the clues were subtle, other times not. Baby D became unstable 12 minutes after being born and remained unstable until death, according to the contemporaneous notes of Stephen Breary, one of the doctors who later brought the case to the police. Neonates with signs of infection and sepsis were common in the unit where there was a bug in its own water supply. A third baby, not in Letby's trial, had the same worrying insulin test results, which were only wrong supposedly 1 time in 200, and was transferred to another hospital. This baby had the extra tests which revealed natural causes. The baby had developed hyperinsulinism and made a full recovery. Maybe Lucy Letby was often, but not always, there because she was one of the most qualified and working the most overtime in the overstretched unit. But if so, when she was removed, why did the excess deaths suspiciously drop back to normal? Perhaps because, at exactly the same time, the unit was downgraded to remove the sickest babies with which they struggled to cope, and their overall number reduced. Staffing levels returned to normal, and the consultants' rounds were daily once more. Unknown to the jury, her deranged scribblings were therapy, instigated by the hospital's occupational health manager. Lucy was encouraged to write out every troubling thought. The negative words were right next to others that said, "I haven't done anything wrong," and "Why me?" As the internal hospital inquiry eventually moved to a criminal one, Lucy became no longer the bright and optimistic person described by all her friends.
She is goofy and makes us all laugh. Very bubbly, loves a cocktail, just the fun of getting dressed up and going out with your friends. She is the kindest person that I've ever known. She would only ever want to help people. To say that she could have harmed any baby, it's just not in her nature.
What is more likely, that the deaths in a neonatal unit with multiple systemic failures happened in exactly the way that was predicted by senior staff, or a much-loved nurse was actually a serial killer who used 5 different methods of murder and attempted murder while leaving no motive or hard evidence?
We can now report that Lucy Letby has been found guilty of the murder of 7 babies, the attempted murder of 6 babies.
Framing A was that of the trial. Although sporadic elements were mentioned, there was no cohesive framing B presented to the jury. Without this, and with a faltering Lucy in the witness box, the 12 men and women were persuaded that benign explanations for every piece of evidence was just too unlikely. The Royal Statistical Society were so concerned that the whole case was built on sand that they sent a report to the Crown Prosecution Service prior to the main trial. It was ignored, and the prosecution did not disclose this expert testimony to the defence. Curiously, a consultant of the RSS, Jane Hutton, was originally engaged by Cheshire Police for help with the statistical aspect of the case, but they later told her that the Crown Prosecution Service has instructed us not to pursue this avenue any further at present. As humans, we can't help but spot patterns in random events. And once we've done so, it can be hard to unsee it. A Texan sharpshooter repeatedly fires a gun into the side of a barn at random. He then draws a target around the highest concentration of hits. What a shot! In the exact same way, every baby not fitting the prosecution's case on the now notorious staffing chart had been removed. The two framings are not equal. Framing A only looked damning because the real medical condition of the extremely vulnerable babies, the real standard of care, and the real statistical odds were, to be charitable, opaque. The troubled unit's deaths were expected and even predicted. That is deeply upsetting and tragic. But if you are looking for the simplest and most obvious explanation, there never was any need to invoke a genius scheming serial killer who had hitherto been masquerading as a normal, kind person for her entire life. Some have questioned the motives of the doctors who first made the allegations. They had been shamed into an apology to Lucy when she fought back against her removal from the unit. In the judgment of the appeal of the attempted murder of baby K in October 2024, the judge criticised Dr. Jerem.
There was an inconsistency between his evidence and the contemporaneous records. Whether there are or may be issues arising from the first trial which have yet to be the subject of judicial consideration is not for us to say. That would be speculative.
There is one further mystery surrounding the original trial. Quite why Lucy's defence was so poor when so much basic stuff went unchallenged. Experts were ready, but not called. Whatever the reason for that was, the upshot is clear. The odds that Lucy Letby had an unfair trial and has an unsafe conviction are pretty good.